artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hello, welcome to episode 248. We have been talking with Tim O'Reilly, one of the great thought leaders who has shaped the structure and values that govern your experience of the online world. Tim is founder, CEO, and chairman of O'Reilly Media, which for over 35 years has connected and informed the people working at the coalface of digital technology. Yes, that's before even the World Wide Web. Tim has been instrumental in the development and penetration of the open source movement and created the term Web 2.0 to denote the shift to a web that end users created too, through mechanisms like social media. Named by Inc. magazine as the Oracle of Silicon Valley, he created the concept of Gov 2.0 for the concept of government as a platform, using technology to interact with its citizens on unprecedented levels. And in 2016, he opened for President Barack Obama at the White House Frontiers Conference, talking about the impact of AI on the economy, explaining why we must use it not to replace people, but to empower them to tackle jobs that were previously impossible. His 2017 book, WTF, What's the Future and Why It's Up to Us, explores the technological forces on our world and how to harness them for a better future. Last week, we talked about intellectual property rights in the generative AI era and Tim's conversations with Sam Altman, parallels with the evolution of Linux, comparing incentives with social media, the future of content-generating work, and opportunities for entrepreneurial flowering. This week, we're going to talk about the effects of generative AI on our work processes, what AI does to the value model of accessing information, meme stocks in the new economy, AGI, and preference alignment and market influencing leading to collective intelligence. No, really, we are, as I said at the end, mind-blowing. Let's get back into the interview with Tim O'Reilly. And I want to explore a development that I see happening here, because people are using generative AI to create all kinds of work products. And so I personally am experiencing something that's happening, replicated all across knowledge work, I'm sure, where I'm receiving these beautiful, long documents where I would have gotten a shorter memo, but someone has clearly used generative AI to produce a more impressive product that's got a whole lot more detail in it. And so instead of getting a one-page memo, I've got a 10-page document, and now I've got to read that. And part of my defensive process might be to ask generative AI to summarize this thing into what do I need to know out of it. That is wasteful at the very least, but it also can't stand for long because it's inefficient in ways that I haven't fully understood yet, but it's got to evolve in some way because we're abusing an information and content ecosystem here. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about where this might go.
Well, first off, I do think the observations of Herbert Simon are very relevant. He basically wrote many years ago, or actually it was a talk he gave. He said there was talk on information abundance, which was back in 1970 when he said this, was he could already see this future that we were coming at. And he said, what does information consume? The answer is obvious, it consumes attention. And so an abundance of information will lead to a paucity of attention. And if you think about the internet through that lens, the great source of market power that came to people like Google and Amazon and Meta was that they built machines for manipulating and managing human attention. So AI is a continuation of that. So they are machines for making better use of abundant information. So obviously, if people are using it to create documents that are long when short would be better, they're just misusing it. That's kind of like back in You may be old enough to remember Alta Vista and the flashing, the early web things where people went, oh, wow, I can build an interface with flashing things and try to get your attention. And then along comes Google. And it's just like a search bar. And they won because they understood in some way that it wasn't trying to grab your attention. It was really to be in service. And of course, they lost the plot later on. And that's, of course, the papers. I wrote a series of papers over the last 3 or 4 years at University College London about what I was calling algorithmic rents. This idea that companies use their control over attention algorithms to extract economic rents, either from their users in the form of attention and money from their suppliers who are trying to reach those users by controlling. If you look at Amazon's much vaunted advertising business, it's really a payola business. And that's the thing that I think is really interesting here, because one of the reasons why I think this AI moment is challenging for the incumbents, for the Googles and the Amazons of this world, is they started out with this incredible promise, which is, we will help you manage information abundance. And so let's take Amazon. We will help you out of millions of products, find you the best one for the best price. And now what do? Now that they've discovered advertising? Our research, just look up algorithmic attention rents, UCL, Tim O'Reilly, whatever, you'll find a bunch of papers on this. But one of them is called Behind the Clicks. And with our research, we looked at Amazon's organic search results, which is their real best effort to find the best product for the best price for the user. And we looked at their advertising results. And now, where are the organic results on the page versus the advertising results? And the organic results have been pushed down. The advertising results have been pushed up. And basically now Amazon's customers get products that are 17% more expensive and a third worse by Amazon's own rankings. So they basically traded their original advantage, which was the solution of this information problem, for this sort of cheap fix. And I think Google has done a lot of the same thing. You see all the ways that throughout the history of these companies, just take Instagram. We started out, okay, we'll show you the people that you really care about. Well, Facebook originally, we'll show you the people we really care about. Then it's like, no, we'll show you stuff that's good for us, not good for you. Instagram, well, okay, we're going to show you, okay, now you can go away from Facebook. You can have this new service that'll show you the stuff you really want. And each of these things ends up basically breaking that promise. And I think one of the big attractions of AI is like, I feel like I'm in control again. I can get the information that I want, and it's not yet perverted yet. And in a certain way, I think that's a really interesting, it's going to potentially be a reawakening. Certainly if we don't know what the economic models are going to be, but these companies are addicted to enormous profits. Again, I wrote a paper called Rising Tide Rents and Robber Baron Rents, which is about this idea that companies originally get these outsized profits because they're innovating and they're solving a real problem. They build this new market and the thing goes up and to the right, but everything eventually flattens out. But our financial markets say, well, wait, you can't flatten out. We're going to punish you for that. You're not an interesting company anymore. And particularly with a company where you pay your people in stock, you have to have the stock price keep going out. So they switch over to extractive rents. So it's no longer good enough for Google or Amazon to basically make the kind of money they were making before, because guess what? This idea of Schumpeterian rents is they get competed away. But as they start to be competed away, they're kind of going, well, we have market power. We're going to turn to extractive rents so that we can stay profitable. And so I think that we're in this transition point that was long overdue. The problem with it, though, is I would feel a lot better about this AI moment if it looked like the early PC or it looked like the early web. People forget, Google became powerful not because they spent a ton of money to take over the world. They raised a total of, I believe, $35 or $37 million. That's all it took. They won because they actually had this amazing service. And I think that it's really interesting to see this AI kind of came in on the back of this idea that Reid Hoffman called blitzscaling, which has been in play since around 2010, which is the way you win in Silicon Valley is you flood the zone with so much money that you drive out any competition. If you can get to the top of this new market first, and it's a situation where it seems to me that the market isn't deciding on the winner. capital is deciding on the winner.
And that process requires going into huge amounts of debt in the process.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to. I mean, what we've sort of figured out is that my guess is that if we'd had a little bit slower, we didn't have a blitz scaling model, we might have got to where we are now with a much more interesting architecture for the industry. But now the DeepSeek moment has come along, and it's sort of like, I think it is sort of like as Linux was to the world that Microsoft owned, DeepSeek may well be to the world that OpenAI thought they were going to own.
I'd like to take the discussion of capital in another direction now. It really seems that AI has accelerated the flow of capital towards existing capital and draining it out of places where there wasn't enough to begin with. And in other words, it's making people who were already pretty rich a lot richer and disadvantaging people that are not. You may disagree, I'm not sure, but it's a dynamic that has a lot of people's attention. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I guess I would sort of say, yes, I think that there is this Silicon Valley pursuit of monopoly as a business strategy is a bad idea. But I don't know, we're sort of in a topsy-turvy world that I don't think any of us understand. If you look at financial markets in general, they don't resemble anything that our parents would recognize. Just sort of take for a minute Elon Musk as the world's richest man. In the old days, companies were valued on the earnings. And effectively, you can take that to a time horizon. You go, okay, this company is valued at, I think the S&P 500 was somewhere, maybe it was 10 or whatever, I don't know, 10 times earnings. So you go, okay, owning this is like, I'll have this income stream for 10 years and I'm willing to pay for that future income stream. Well, when Elon first became the world's richest man, Tesla had a price earnings ratio of 1,000. That means that people were saying it's going to be making this level of money for 1,000 years, or it's going to be making 1,000 times as much money. And anybody could look at this and go, well, it's not going to be making that much money. So there's Tesla, the company, the old school company, and then there's Tesla, the meme stock. And basically, Elon is a meme stock billionaire. And I actually did this research, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where I compared Google as an example to Elon. And I looked at Larry and Sergey and I said, what would have happened if Larry and Sergey had kept Google private and they had just taken out their share of its profits in dividends? You know, they would have been just as rich because it was a real company. Whereas Tesla was not that for Elon. It's all this betting market.
Right. And we saw that in 1999.
Yeah, exactly.
Though, right? I mean, Webvan was not worth as much as United Airlines, but on paper, people thought or were claiming it was. And we know what happened next.
That's right. And I think we're in that world. I forget the guy's name, but it'll come back to me. But there's an economist who studied IPOs. And he's looked over the last 20 years, 70% of all IPOs are for companies with no profits at all. So our entire economy has become kind of a meme market in a certain way, rather than a real financial market. And I'm of two minds about this. In one part of my mind, I say, this is really broken. And in another part of my mind, I say, oh, this is the future economy. This is the economy that Cory Doctorow wrote about in his first novel, Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom. And it's very much related to what I said earlier. When something becomes abundant, when it becomes a commodity, you find a way to add value. And you add value through, it's very imaginary, right? Like the fact that this water is from Fiji and this water is from a glacier becomes the source of the ability to charge a pretty reasonable price for a commodity. And the fact that this stock is going to go to, gazillion, and you see this, of course, in the real meme stocks with no story but the story. You see it in crypto. It's all assets that have no use. They're simply ways for people to spend their abundance. It's like betting on a horse.
Right.
And so I guess I kind of go, maybe that is the shape of the future economy. And so back to Down Out in the Magic Kingdom, it was a story where the source of abundance was not AI, but nanotechnology, and they have machines that could make anything, right? And of course, the two themes are, one, it's hoarded by the big companies, and that's often the case. But people compete. There's a currency called Woofy, which is kind of like an attention currency. And so he really predicted pretty well, this is 25 years ago, what's the shape of today's economy. People are competing for attention in a world where, for a lot of people, even in developed countries, relatively what we consider poor people have their everyday needs largely met. And they spend a lot more of their income on things that are affective rather than actually necessary. And again, some of that's because of the way our economy preys on them. We should really, it's like, okay, if that's how rich people want to spend their money, just sort of betting on stocks instead of on horses, that's fine. But if you start preying on people who basically haven't got their basic needs met, that's predatory. So anyway, the point I'm making is, by the standards of the past, this is very, very badly broken. But we may be just heading into a world that is just a very different world. Now, again, then I put that against the historical side with climate change, and you kind of go, well, that's not going to last.
So many topics. There are some questions I want to make sure that I get in our remaining time. In your book, What's the Future, handily abbreviated WTF, that preceded ChatGPT. So your comments about artificial general intelligence there were, we're not there yet. That's a more debatable question now. What's your position on that question?
Well, I guess I would sort of say, I think that AGI is, obviously it's a moving target. In the beginning, it was like, oh my God, we're going to have machines that are smarter than all of us, and they'll be independent, and they're going to take over the world, and their humans will be like chickens to them, or it's like chickens are to us. And now we move to, well, it'll be artificial general intelligence when it makes a company $100 billion, right? Or something like that. Crazy ass shit like that, And I'm kind of like, I can see it is quite remarkable when you interact with an AI. They are really capable and really able to do things. They have no volition whatsoever. So there's that big gulf that we talked about already. I think that, I guess I would sort of say that the observations I made in WTF, which is that we give the objectives to these machines. When we were doing that even back then, I was talking about these fast algorithm machines at Google and Amazon, and they are given their objectives, and they have an objective function that they're trying to maximize. And I think today's AI is just a more general version of the kind of specialized AIs that were Google search or Amazon rankings or whatever. And so they're more generalized predictors. And so they are definitely a general purpose technology. But they do have this idea of optimizing. And are they optimizing for the right thing is the question.
Well, I think the last question I'd like to ask then is, you brought up this issue of volition a couple of times, the distinction between the humans and the AI being that we tell the AI what to do, and it goes off and does it, and the rest of the time it spends waiting for us to give it a command. And now we have agentic AI. The hot thing now is AI agents, and those at least blur that line.
They do.
You can see the runway to an AI that is working on maximized paperclip production. And it does wake up in the morning with something to do.
Well, it doesn't ever stop, actually. It doesn't ever sleep.
True, it doesn't need to sleep. So where do you see, with your futurologist hat on, this going?
Well, first off, that really was the point of my book, which is we've already built machines like that. And yes, there'll be more of them, and they may be more pervasive. But for me, one of the central themes of my book is that our financial markets are the first AI. And I made the point also in the book, which I think is an important one in this whole discussion, which is that AI is not a singular thing apart from us. I actually used the example of the origin of eukaryotic cells, which was basically, here's a virus trapped inside a bacterium, or maybe it was the other way around, one kind of bacterium inside of another. And that became complex multicellular organism. And we are the insides of these complex multicellular organisms like markets, like large language models, where they are becoming real-time reflections of billions of humans. And we do give them objectives. Basically, the market is a machine for maximizing share prices, and it is already running our companies. You see companies try to say, oh, yeah, I don't want to maximize shareholder value. I want to worry about the fact that we're burning up the planet, and the market says, screw you. We want dividends. We want share buybacks. We don't want you to invest in fighting climate change.
But then I've got to ask, where are the leverage points for people who are concerned about dynamics like that to change that? Because the alternative is that we're just at the mercy of whatever the market does, and I'm not going to subscribe to that.
I think that there are really interesting possibilities with AI where, and this actually comes from something that my brother said once. He was sort of reflecting on Aristotle's idea of virtue, which is the control of the appetites by reason. And he said his formulation of that was, virtue is remembering what you really want. And maybe AI could be used to help us figure out what we really want. And there's some really interesting research papers. I can't remember the author or the title of the paper right now, but it was one that came out a couple of years ago, and I heard a presentation about it at CHAI, the Conference on Human-Centered AI, last year. And it was basically this work on having AI take a group of humans who don't have all the same preferences. I mean, that's the problem with this whole idea that we can align AI with human values. And the job of the AI was not to be aligned to any particular group of values. The job of the AI was to come up with formulations of values that more humans could agree to.
That would produce alignment. I remember this study. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting thing. Rather than saying, oh yeah, well, we're going to be aligned with Elon Musk, or we're going to be aligned with the DEI folks, or, which is kind of where we've ended up. You're kind of going, okay, could we have mechanisms by which, if we are going to be a collective being with our technology, which goes back to this idea that I've talked about for decades, that we're building a global brain that is the sum of all of us mediated by technology. What do the thoughts look like in that global brain? How does it come to consensus? How does it come to its values? And is it just the product of a few people at the top who set the objective function? Or is it emergent from the beliefs and the desires and the needs of all of us? And I could see a very, very different collective intelligence of humanity that looks around and says, whoa, we need to deal with this. We need to deal with that. And it's not the AI deciding on its own, but it's the AI sort of drawing out from all of us that sense of what we need.
It's the new internet. It's the thing that connects us.
Yeah, it is. That's right. The internet was an early stage of this thing that we are birthing.
Wow. Well, talking about a global brain seems a good place to wrap this up. Anything else might be an anticlimax. What can you tell our listeners about where they can find out more about what you're doing, what you're saying, and how to follow you?
Obviously, O'Reilly.com is the company site, and we have an area where we post essays called Radar, O'Reilly Radar. So if you Google for that. I also have this thing called the AI Disclosures Project at the Social Science Research Council, and an associated Substack called Asimov's Addendum. And you may remember Asimov's three laws of robotics, and we will, well, they're not really done. So we'll have a Substack, which is, okay, how do we actually get AIs to align with what humans want?
And where would people find out about future books that are in the works?
Well, if it's from O'Reilly, they should go to O'Reilly.com.
I mean, books that you're writing.
Yeah, if you're out following me in the metaverse, you'll hear about it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Tim O'Reilly. It has been an incredible discussion, mind-blowing, and I think that will take our listeners on a voyage of discovery and thought that will last them quite a while.
All right. Well, I'm just sharing what I'm trying to think through for myself, and I hope if we all keep thinking about the real implications of what we're doing, we will come to something. We are effectively, I'm thinking about Thoreau's, the unexamined life is not worth living. We actually have an opportunity where we're all billions of us coming together in this great reflection about what kind of future we want to build.
That's been one of my themes for quite a while now, that AI holds up a mirror to us and depends on whether we like what we see.
Exactly. I use that too. AI is a mirror, not a master, is one of my lines I use all the time.
That's the end of the interview. Ending up at Global Brain is just the sort of thing that happens when you're talking with Tim. I feel my own brain considerably more lit up by that conversation. More than ever, AI looks to me like the mirror that we talked about right at the end there. We could wind up in Armageddon, or we could have a global brain that maximizes human values over the whole planet. What's it going to take for us to choose the right one? By the way, the papers that Tim mentioned are linked from the show transcript. In today's news, ripped from the headlines about AI, and very much dovetailing with last week's news about Google co-scientist, startup Tetsuwan Scientific is making robots that can run experiments on their own. Founders Christian Ponce and Theo Schaefer, who met in 2023 at a Halloween party thrown by Entrepreneur First, a kind of networking program for entrepreneurs, decided that there was too much manual labor in genetic engineering, mostly moving liquids from one tube to another, and a robot could do that. Well, their robots don't just do that. They evaluate results and recalibrate equipment as necessary. You can imagine how much faster scientific experiments can run when humans are taken out of the loop. Next week, my guest will be Adam Unikowski, a Supreme Court and constitutional litigator who has some experience and predictions from the perspective of a lawyer on how AI will affect the practice of law. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's aiandyou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.